And welcome to Mindful Live number 35. Welcome. I'm glad you could be here. It is presently the 9th of February in the year of our Lord 2022. And welcome to Mindful Live number 35. Tonight, the stories that we'd be starting off talking about tonight have to do with the fraud that is being perpetrated in our country. They call us tricky daddians all around the world, apparently. That's what I've heard regularly. They call us tricky daddians all around. So it seems like we're living up to that reputation right now because the Trinidadians have come out tricky for them with fraud being perpetrated in the case of the vaccine cards, and we're joining the company of Guyana in likewise manner. All right, let's get into that story one time. Make sure to hit that like button regardless of which live you're on. Make sure you hit that like button. If you're watching this again over on YouTube on the replay, you can hit that like button or drop a comment. If you're on the live and you ever miss piece of it, feel free to subscribe to my channel over on YouTube, Nathan Springer on YouTube. Do go over there and subscribe. The lives are saved there, at least the significant news portion where we speak about the news and the events of the day. That is there daily, daily for you to consume if you so choose. Go over there and subscribe by all means. So make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're in the live. Make sure you're subscribed if you're over on YouTube. And let's get to it. 6 held in false vaccination card crackdown. 6 persons were arrested by police in connection with the issuing of false COVID-19 vaccination cards. A statement from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service on Wednesday stated that acting on information, officers of the Fraud Squad Special Investigations Unit and the Northern Division conducted 2 sting operations in the Southwestern and Northern Division on Monday. In the first exercise, Fraud Squad officers proceeded to the Faizabad Health Center where they observed a nurse pretending to administer a vaccine to an individual. The nurse thereafter issued a COVID-19 vaccination card to the individual for a fee. Now, it would seem, good night Lee Foreverboard over there. Good night. All right. It would seem that the theme of the night, when you look over at a lot of these incidents, it would seem like the theme of the night is snitching. Because I could tell you, if you're reading from this story here, and the information that the officers say, they went over to the Faizabad Health Center and they observed a nurse pretending to administer a vaccine to an individual. How do you as a police officer happen into a health center and observe such a thing? I find that nearly impossible to believe. I don't think they observed that. I think the person who got that fake injection, that person, they saw something and they said something. That's the way I would see that. They saw something and they said something. The person involved, yes, it was a sting operation. That was not just an observation, because that is the entire thing about this. That's the entire thing about this. And when you look at how these people were conducting their operations, that seems a little harder to figure out. Because if you're faking giving that vaccine, then the only people that generally know that would be you, the person who got the fake vaccine, and the nurse who gave the fake vaccine. Even the person who signs your card or whatever else. Other people, even in the same institution, even in the same facility, don't even have to know that occurred. And on the same day, the nurse could be doing fake vaccines and could be doing real vaccines at the same time. So how are you even going to figure that out? I mean, you could arrest the nurse now and, well, nurse going to have a tough time to face. But I think anybody who would have gotten those fake vaccine cards already may have already gotten away. That would be extremely hard, dare I say impossible, to figure out. Yes, the nurse would be in a lot of trouble, very likely, but we'd see where that all goes. The suspect was arrested and further inquiries resulted in the arrest of several other persons, one of whom subsequently tested positive for COVID-19. I found that little bit to be the cherry on top of this grand ice cream sundae. So they're out here running their professional fraud faking vaccine card operation, and somebody inside of the entire process is actually COVID positive at the moment it happened. Now, this entire story I find to have so many missing bits. Why did they test the individuals? Is it the police common practice now that anyone arrested is tested for COVID-19? What made them test this individual to know they had COVID? How did that happen? I don't even fully understand what would have gone on here. So okay, you arrested the first nurse who did the whole fake business. I can't confirm or deny. The same racket happens. I am not calling the Mr. Hex Senpai 868. I am not calling the name of any healthcare facility with that allegation. I do not know. And I am not going to be the internet snitch. Not tonight. But I find it so strange. Like, who decided that they would go there? Who decided that they would go there and test the arrested people? How did you even find out they had COVID-19? Or was it that when the police were doing their investigations, okay, we have the nurse, we have some of the administrative staff, whoever else is in the mix here, and then when they put them in the back of the police jeep, they hear someone and every man jack in the police jeep just went like immediately carried for testing, and apparently one of these individuals tested positive for COVID-19. Hi user FBRMPVHEAM, whatever that means. You have to start a podcast, buddy. When y'all say that, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean that you want to hear the audio version on the podcast? Because I do have that. It's just a matter of me actually uploading the audio version on the podcast. So I can do that. Just a matter of time. But yes, I can. I'll do that. I do have a podcast, by the way. Look for MindFULL 2 L's on anywhere you look at your podcasts, and you would find my podcast there. Special arrangements have since been made by the TTPS executive and medical personnel to ensure the safety and welfare of the officers and the COVID-19 positive suspect. The TTPS said officers then proceeded to the Northern Division, where a similar sting operation was conducted. A clerk attached to the North Central Regional Health Authority was observed receiving a sum of cash after they handed over a vaccination card to an individual. The suspects were arrested and the card and cash seized. You know what I find unfair though? I find this unfair to the South people. When they were speaking about the arrests made in South, they told you it was in the Faizabad Health Center. Now they're talking about they went to the Northern Division and someone from the North Central Regional Health Authority. No, call the healthcare facility, not like Hex in the chat. I am not going through that with him. This one over here is, oh no, a live podcast. Well, this is live over on YouTube too, so it could go there. I can actually stream it over on the Twitter Spaces also. I can do that. So if you all are interested in that, I can add in the Twitter Spaces and stream out the same stream that goes to YouTube can also go out to Twitter. So yes, I have no problem with that. Real jokes, but I see where it's going. So Bishop says over on Instagram. Yeah. So I found it very interesting and unfair to the people of South that ONC tours. I found it very unfair to the people of South. When you raided and did your sting operation in Faizabad, you mentioned the name of the healthcare facility. I find that it's only fair you need to mention where the healthcare facility was in this North Central Regional Health Authority. Where that facility was, where did this all go down? We are curious, we would like to know. And as I mentioned in the contemplation today, the reality of this is it fits in line with the general corruption in Trinidad society. What we have effectively done, well, when I say we, what the government has effectively done is they have created a licensing program. The vaccination card is basically, for all intents and purposes, a license of sorts. It licenses you to be able to enter the safe zones. It allows you to enter the safe zones and be able to conduct certain kinds of business. And anytime in Trinidad there's any kind of licensing program, it seems like it's common Trini practice that licenses must be lathered thickly in rich amounts of corruption. It's just the Trini way to do things. So if we have created a new licensing kind of program out of the healthcare facilities, well, in that case, the nurses and other healthcare professionals are now licensing officers. They are the safe zone licensing officers. That's basically what they are now. So now they are in a position to do the same thing that all of our other licensing, not all, let me dial that back. Not all of our other licensing officers, but a large deal. According to someone over on TikTok here, they were saying my friend limes with my Vax card on her phone. You're admitting to fraud. You go on with your brave self. Schizo says, well, yeah, that's the Trini way. You're seeing that and like bubble. Of course, that's common Trini practice. I am not even in the least surprised. Like, that's partially why I'm smiling. It's not like I'm happy that Trinidad is such a corrupt place in a certain sense, but it's like it was very predictable. Who did not see this coming? That if you allow a certain group to basically be in charge of licensing people to enter the safe zones, they're going to take that power and try to make some money out of it. Listen, if you're a healthcare professional and you have flexible morality, your moral compass can move with the wind, you have a moral compass similar to Jack Sparrow's compass from the Pirates of the Caribbean. Your moral compass doesn't necessarily point due north. And you're a healthcare professional, and in this case, you are overworked, you are underpaid, they're trying to force you to be vaccinated, they're saying you're a conspiracy theorist because you have your apprehensions about this new technology, etc., etc., etc. Well, in that case, I could see it if you have that flexible morality. Why? How you could actually justify doing this. This is just, you're making up some overtime hours by just doing this. You're making up some overtime hours while doing this. So that's how some would see it. And I am pretty sure that this whole vaccination card, the whole fraudulent vaccination card business is rampant throughout Trinidad and Tobago because of the nature of how our society functions. And these cards weren't rolled out in some super secure manner. They weren't rolled out like that. A lot of people had access to them from the earlies. And So what the reality of what you're facing isn't a case of fake vaccine cards. Fake vaccine cards would have been fine. You'd be able to spot them and do something about it. But you're not facing faked vaccine cards. The vaccine cards that these people have are authentic with all the correct markings on the vaccine cards. How are you going to figure that out? That's the corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. Another person fell into the hands of the law for a similar matter, but they weren't as clever apparently as the healthcare professionals. A Rima woman held for selling vaccine card for $1,200. Apparently, that's the going rate of a vaccine card these days. $1,200. A 41-year-old Arima woman was arrested after being caught red-handed trying to sell a vaccination card on Tuesday afternoon. Listen to this story again. Listen to this story again. As I said before, the theme of the night when it comes to this is snitching. Police said they got information of the transaction going down and went to Bellbird Avenue, Arima at around 1:30 p.m. where they saw the woman exchanging a document for cash. Police approached the woman when they saw the document was a vaccine card which contained documentation regarding the COVID-19 vaccination. Police arrested the woman and seized the $1,200, which was the proceeds from the illicit transaction. So, everything in this doesn't add up either. Stop on Arima now. Always calling Arima name. That's not my fault. Blame it on the papers. Arima always in the news. If you all want me to stop calling your name, then stop being in the news or start being in the news for some good stuff. But taking this. So the police went there. Police said they got an information of the transaction going down at around 1:30. They saw the woman exchanging the document. So I would like to know which order these events took place in. Was it that the police were waiting unseen and the woman walked up, saw the police officers there and still exchanged the vaccine card for the money? Or was it that the police just had so perfect timing that they passed just at the precise moment when this handoff was occurring? Because according to the police, they saw the handing off of card for money. Listen, I would expect such a handoff to happen pretty quickly. So for the police to notice this, their timing must be impeccable. Or they must be the individual who was being sold the vaccination card in the first place. Listen, I think there are quite a few sting operations going on around the country right now. The irony of it all is that these sting operations may be being run. These operations may be being run by officers who themselves may be unvaccinated because it's more than half of the police force. Up till the latest numbers that were said, more than half of the police force were not vaccinated. The irony of ironies is you're out there going to jail for fraud, being put there by a police officer who himself is unvaccinated. That would just be unfortunate. It would just be unfortunate. What are your thoughts on the new research on the vaccine and immunity? Which new research? There's always some kind of new research. So you'd have to specify a little bit. These police on point like Gary back. No, Gary isn't back. So, our electrician says, so police can run these operations but can't run down bandits. Myself and one of the regulars in the chat, Mr. Richard Globman, we had a chat about that recently, where you really do find as a society that there are some things you would be okay if the police were incapable of doing, if they were able to focus their energies into certain other avenues. People who contracted COVID and overcame it had way stronger immunity. Yes, we spoke about that before, the natural immunity that is being seen now. Yes, natural immunity is being seen to be superior to vaccination alone. The thing that even beats that is if you're vaccinated and you have natural immunity, as in you get the virus after you have been vaccinated, you have even greater protection. But the reality is the amount of protection between natural immunity and that vaccination plus natural immunity is actually not that far. So natural immunity has been shown to be very effective. Now, that isn't to say that you should go out there and get the virus, because the virus still has its negative side effects. The reason you want immunity in the first place is so that you don't get the virus. So, getting the virus in order to not get the virus could seem a little logically cyclic. So you need to be careful, even with this accurate research, what are the conclusions you draw from it. But yes, that is correct. And Trinidadians aren't only being seen for those tricks in the vaccine business. If we look over in the Ministry of Social Development, like nearly every other week, there's some kind of allegation of some kind of fraud going on over there. Someone is always trying to get their hands on monies they aren't supposed to be getting their hands on. So there has been a rental assistance going on now. There are currently 31 people being investigated by the police for lying on those forms. So, as I was saying, if this is a part of common Trinidad culture, what are we to expect from the healthcare professionals? Cox, 31 suspicious rental assistance applications sent to police as part of efforts to clamp down on fraudsters trying to take advantage of income and rental support grants. Minister of Social Development and Family Services, Donna Cox, says 31 suspicious rental applications were sent to the police for further inquiries. Listen, there are many Trinidadians that seem like they swear by this fraudulent method. They're out there putting in fraudulent documents to get some rental assistance, to just get a couple $100 extra for the month. They're doing that. And if there are people inside of the general Trinidad culture that see it as being okay to do that, what do you really think is going on with this entire vaccination business? Listen, the way how corrupt some of this entire thing may be, our figures on vaccination and infection in Trinidad might actually be weighted in a wrong direction because of the amount of fraud that may have already been perpetrated in the system. Yeah. White Walker, does it have a vaccine positive test? As far as I know, there isn't a vaccine positive test, but there are antigen tests that can show you if you have immunity. Dora868 says Trinidadian just know scam. Yeah, they know scam inside and out. They know it real good. Really, really good. That's unfortunate for the entirety of the country, though. And in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't work for the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. And usually I find when you have a population that is willing to run on scheme, you'd get a government that you deserve. If the general population is so willing to willingly run so many schemes and rackets in this country, then you're going to get a government that you deserve out of that. And you know that it doesn't take much for government incompetence. And it's ironic to me that we would be seeing some of these healthcare professionals going to jail for fraud when it comes to these vaccination cards, when maybe this entire situation should not have even existed. The instance of creating the situation where some healthcare professionals can show their dishonesty by fraudulently dispersing of vaccination cards probably should have never been created in the first place. And then the irony on top of that is going to be when and if this is all lifted. Can you imagine that you're sitting in jail for issuing fraudulent vaccination cards at a time when no vaccine cards are needed anymore to go anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago? So you would be in jail over a law that may now not exist anymore. And In the case of the nurses and the other healthcare professionals, well, they may have dug their own grave in that sense. They would have made their own bed, and okay, their own corrupt acts led them into that. Okay, I understand that in that sense. But in some other angles, similarly, people would be struggling off of consequences out of these mandates, out of these protocols that the government puts into place, and that the government just put there and place there sometimes without good scientific backing. If you want to find out how well the government does research into what science they use to make their rules, you can go on, that would be Mindful Live 33, I believe it was. Yes, I know, they would still be in jail, that's what I was saying. But yes, you can go back on that live and see the kind of scientific backing, that the government uses to make their decisions. The scientific backing is lacking. They copy documents from Wikipedia that relate to studies that don't relate to the actual instance that they're talking about. The cremation rights one was a horrible example. I really hope to see that they had some other evidence other than that bit of lying that they did on that affidavit. But yes, the government puts things in place, and then you could fall up and fall afoul of it, and then they could remove it, and everyone goes about their merry way, but the consequences stick with you. Okay, in that case, fraud is a serious thing, and it was your dishonesty. But there are other cases where it may not even necessarily be fraud. And then, as Richard Globman pointed out there, he basically said the ever-present statement of obey the law. And if you obey the law, you have nothing to worry about. But here's the thing. These government officials can change the laws and change the policies sometimes on a whim without it making sense. And then if you add to that that some of these officials are making these laws just based on a whim, and then there are police officers, law enforcement officers who have no care for using logic, have no care for using morality, have no care for using common decency. Once the government official says it's law, there would be some law enforcement officer out there, this is my job, it's the law, obey the law, I am going to enforce it. There'd always be them. They were there over in Nazi Germany back in the 1940s, and they just said it was the law. You know, they were obeying their orders, and they rounded up people and killed them and murdered them. So the law, just being the law isn't fair enough for me. And you could see the consequences of some of this. So there are some consequences, and right now the state is going to have to pay money because of some of the consequences. And we do see some of the laws being made on a whim. Here's one example. Well, not the law, but the execution of it. State to pay 2 women for illegal quarantine. The state now has to fork out more than 0.2 million to pay 2 women who were under state supervised quarantine in 2020, having been suspected of contracting COVID-19 but turned out to be negative. Bear in mind, when they say the state, they're talking about you and I. That 0.2 million that has to leave the coffers is leaving the coffers of taxpayers' money. So that is costing us. And this is the problem I have with so many decisions that the state and the government makes. These people make decisions where a failure costs them nothing. That is the problem. And that was the problem with many of these COVID policies. Okay, they made this policy here. They grabbed these 2 women, threw them into quarantine when they should not have, and okay, they were wrong. They found out they were wrong. Now, the people who actually made the decision would lose nothing over it. And if you are in a position where you make decisions that have no negative effect on you, then the value and the optimization of those decisions would almost always be lacking. And that's just one of the disadvantages with the setup that we have right now of governance in most countries in reality. That's the truth for most countries. Making a bad decision costs them nothing. And in this pandemic, it would always seem good to, it's always better to overreact than underreact. You don't want it to look like you could have done more. So you'd always push further, and then if something bad happens, well, whoever has to pay has to pay. That's one of the disadvantages. no consequences for negative results of your actions. After close to 2 weeks in quarantine and being made to be among those who were actually tested positive for the virus, the woman eventually tested negative and were released from Cora Hospital. Last week, Justice Avison Quinlan Williams signed off on 2 consent orders in which the Office of the Attorney General agreed to pay Sasha Supersad and Vidya Lala the sums of $100,000 and $115,000 respectively. Neither Supersad nor Lala had any recent travel history when they were detained by medical staff and placed under state-supervised quarantine. Lala has since died from an unrelated illness, and therefore the sum agreed upon by the state would be paid out to her husband. That, I find, is so unfortunate. And that's the scary thing about state power. These women with no history of travel could have just been grabbed, thrown into a facility against their will without due process. And bear in mind, the apprehension of people and taking away of their rights without due process is literally what made, back in World War II, what they called concentration camps. What made them concentration camps was basically that idea. When you take citizens and you take away their rights without due process. The health personnel made a decision in a pandemic based on observation. I can't see how that is government fault, says one of the commenters here. Okay, let's see how that is government's fault. The only reason the healthcare professionals, because the healthcare personnel could not have made that decision to take away someone's freedom of movement without having governmental authority backing them. That's how they were able to make that decision. So, yes, it was their decision that they initiated, but the permission to make that decision was given by the government through governmental policies. So, for example, I remember speaking to an officer, and he was speaking about, remember a pandemic? Yeah, right. So, here's the thing. An emergency isn't an excuse for the government to have any reason to take away people's rights. That's if you allow the government to get supreme power in an emergency, they're going to create emergencies to take supreme power. That is the height of idiocy. Pandemics don't remove logic and human rights. That just does not happen, and that's one of the problems that we faced in this pandemic. And that's why right now in Canada they have cities locked up and they have gridlock traffic with truckers blocking up their entire city because they tried to overreach their human rights because it was a pandemic. We have the right, we have the governmental authority to do as we please because it's an emergency, it's a pandemic. And what if they were positive? What if the sky was yellow? It does not matter. What ifs don't matter. They were not positive. That's like I shoot you and then I tell the judge, what if he wanted to attack me? That does not make sense. You don't what if that situation. You cannot tell somebody, I'm going to remove your rights. You have there's no proof of you being positive for this virus, but I'm going to grab you, throw you in a facility with sick people and take away your rights and your freedom of movement for 2 weeks, and then I'll say, oops, our mistake. That is insane. You do not want to live in a society like that. The reason I suppose that you may be comfortable with some of these decisions is because it seems like you may be a law enforcement officer. And very often, the LEOs, those law enforcement officers, are very okay with authoritarian leadership because they know that they can be exempted from it. We will be the stormtroopers, so we don't have to worry about what the stormtroopers are going to destroy. And I find that to be a very selfish position. You feel it's just in case licks we use to get as churn. And here's the thing, Skitsu. I remember that. I never got just in case licks, but I remember. What do you think PTSD protests? I don't know enough about that right now. I'm still reading up a bit on that. I remember I hear especially some of the older generation talk about just in case licks. just in case licks from your parents, who are your parents, is already an unreasonable, unfair thing. Can you imagine your government? These random understand what understand what a government is. Politicians, multimillionaires sitting in air-conditioned offices are going to tell you that we are going to beat you just in case. We are going to lock away your rights just in case. Everything, bear in mind, this is how you think about government policies. When you're thinking about government policies, don't just think that these are people trying their best for the betterment of society. No, that's not what you're just thinking about. These are people that are making rules that are being enforced by the barrel of a gun. If you don't obey these rules, if you disobey, your rights would be taken away. So, in that case, you have to be very, very, very meticulous about watching what rules these people set. It's just common sense. Think about it like a giant walking through a civilization of tiny people. It's Gulliver Travels. I don't know how many of you have read that old book. Think of the state, think of the government as a giant walking through tiny little communities with tiny little people. The giant is to display the power of the government. They have that much power. So, because they have that much power, any false move from the government can have buildings being crushed, can have entire lives, entire families being crushed and killed and displaced. That's the power of government. So in that case, we, the tiny people, have to be looking at the government to make sure every step that they take is extra careful. And then it seems so insulting sometimes to see the boots of the government, which is the police force, which are the law enforcement officers. They are the boots of this giant government, this giant state. And then this boot of this giant state that is on their foot and is being used to crush people, that boot would turn around and tell the people, well, it's not our fault, it's just what the state ordered us to do. I find that whole prospect to be ridiculous. And then they would make it seem like we have no right to question where the state puts this boot. We have all right to question it. We always should question it. Have you ever did some sort of corruption, whether it's big or small? I guess so. CRC Tahal asks, how are we to attempt stopping this tyranny? Don't allow it to happen. That's one of the simple ways. Speak about it. Point it out wherever you see it. Don't be silent if you see it. And in the case of Canadian truckers, drive your truck. All right. Yes, they were placed in the Cora Hospital and they were placed among sick people. The reports they had out of Cora Hospital was that it was a horror show. In her affidavit, Super Sad said she went to the Arima Health Facility on the morning of March 30th and later transferred to the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex because of her asthmatic condition. She was also detained and later transferred to Cora and placed in the same ward as Lala until April 9th. I was forced to eat and sleep in the feces smeared room, which was accompanied by frequent urination on the floor by some patients. That's a horror story. And to say that it was just, oops, sorry, we made a mistake. Nah. That doesn't cut it for me. That does not make sense for me. And further decisions the state makes that they just have no consequence over. The state zone, the safe zone among sports facilities and in sporting arenas. I find that doesn't make sense. Those safe zones don't make sense. Over in Tobago, they have a problem with it, of course. Sports for all. Tobago track and field clubs upset over vax policy. The majority of Tobago sporting clubs are yet to get the ball rolling after government announced a return to play policy for vaccinated athletes, coaches, and officials. All around the world, some of the most hesitant people for vaccination are athletes. And I do not blame them. If you are an athlete, you are athletic. Very likely you are young. Very likely you are healthy. Those two categories Those two categories already show that your likeliness of falling ill and falling badly ill with this virus is very low. And then there are reasons out there among athletes that have them pretty apprehensive about taking this vaccine. So to say that all sports require by force in order for you to participate that everyone be vaccinated, that does not make sense. The sports themselves may be a measure to allow people to be less susceptible to getting gravely ill from the same virus. The sports itself is a mitigation method. So why are you making it so exclusive? That does not make sense. But again, there's no consequence to the government for fouling up this policy. If people miss out on 2 years of sports, to the government ministers, that is inconsequential. Yeah, you have gained some weight. They don't care. They don't care. That doesn't bother them. Yeah, your club couldn't function for 2 years. Yeah, they ran into arrears. Doesn't bother them. Has nothing to do with them. There's no negative consequence to them for that. So why does it matter? And if you look over at sports, NFL, an article that I pulled up recently, NFL had one COVID-19 hospitalization out of 7,000 players, coaches, and staff this season. One. And bear in mind, not all members of the NFL were vaccinated. There were some members that were unvaccinated. And even among those unvaccinated members, there was one instance of hospitalization. One. And I don't even trust the NFL vaccination numbers, because we have already found out by now that multiple athletes have been lying about their vaccination status. And I don't find that surprising. If you're an athlete and you don't have that amount, you're not at Kyrie Irving kind of level where you're willing to be just that contrarian voice and you're willing to stand out there by yourself. If you're not that kind of person, well, you would want to at least, you would want it to be seen that you took that vaccine. But if you have been convinced otherwise that this is so dangerous for you, then maybe you don't want to take it at the same time. And if fraud can happen over in tiny little Trinidad for $1,200, don't you think that some NFL athletes who make millions per year could do something similar? What competitive sport in the world does not require vaccination? Tennis. Novak Djokovic was kicked out of Australia not because of the competition rules, but because of weird Australian rules. NBA has started back bringing in their unvaccinated players, because when Omicron hit, their vaccinated players started dropping off there. Anyway, I take it, the NBA did not have a vaccination policy forcing vaccination. There were vaccination rules in some states. That's what prohibited some players like Kyrie Irving from playing, because New York had a vaccination mandate for indoor facilities, so he couldn't train. So basketball allowed it. NFL allowed it, as what's this quarterback? Oh, I forgot his name. Is it Aaron something or something? Aaron something of the sort. He was in a good bit of bacchanal because he did not take the vaccine, and he kind of lied about it earlier. There were several other NFL athletes who came out and they didn't take the vaccine. I am not sure which international sport requires vaccination. Many of these sports don't require vaccination. Some facilities, some of the indoor arenas, etc., may have vaccine mandates, but the sporting bodies themselves, Mr. Richard Globman, don't usually require it. And with the NFL, even though one person went to the hospital, even the one person who reportedly even the one person who was reportedly hospitalized, they spent one night in the hospital and then was out by the next day, and within a couple of weeks was back on the field. So it seems apparent to me the sports stars, the sports athletes are not at that high a risk. Most of the players are vaxxed, yes, that is true, but that's irrelevant to the point I am making. It seems that at this moment, as the evidence and the science would say, it doesn't have a huge impact on the athletes. And I would think, if I were to assume, I would assume that they don't have players vaxxed. My entire thought train got thrown off there. Anil James says a woman in the US out of healthcare center in New York City got charged in a sting for selling fake vaccine cards. Of course that would happen. Whether it's here or there, of course that would happen. But yes, many sports don't require it. And all right, I remember my chain of thought. Now, I would wonder, would it be, if it were possible to do a scientific study and compare both, if you were able to compare keeping an athlete away from training and playing in their sport versus the same training, playing athlete getting COVID-19. And if you were to do a comparative risk study and see which one of these measures actually had more negative impact on that athlete, that would be an interesting study to have. And I would not doubt that the results may surprise some of the healthcare professionals out there. I will not doubt that maybe keeping some people away from training and participating in sports might actually have more negative outcomes than them being unvaccinated. I will not doubt that. And in the case of that, again, we see government policies where it seems like they aren't even fully thinking this through because there's no consequence for them being wrong. They're just making the policy and putting it out there. And maybe if someone complains in time, then it would change. I remember, was it last week, we were going through quite a few stories, it seemed like that we were seeing things happening. A policy was put in place and it doesn't make sense, but it's only when someone challenges it in court, then the government is like, oh, all right, this doesn't make sense, then we remove it. Didn't you think about the policy, before you did it? I would have thought, that's what you do before you put something into place. You kind of flesh it out and think it through. Or maybe, as Richard Glubman gives them the excuse, it's a pandemic and an emergency, so who cares about thoughts? Policy first, thoughts after. Sure. How did that work out for everyone? All right. That's about all we have for tonight. We have an end there for YouTube and Instagram. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained. And thank you, NC Tours. Thank you. And do tune in next time. Tonight is Wednesday, so I'll be here tomorrow night. Again, Thursday night starting around 9:30 p.m. Do tune in and meet me there. Again, if you missed out on Piece of the Live, go over to my YouTube channel, Nathan Springer over on YouTube, and do subscribe there. You would be able to pick up most of the lives there. Again, the starting time around that 9:30 p.m. time tomorrow. Not 9:50, 9:30. See you then. I am going to be hanging around on TikTok for a little while longer. If you are so interested in chatting, you can